George Orwell was responsible for my re-education. My first posting when I was in the RAF was RAF Tangmere in Sussex near Chichester. I was a radar technician, and this was a pretty highly classified, not classified, well, classified in terms of actually level of trades and occupations in the scheme of things in the RAF. And I worked in a unit which was interesting insofar as at that time there were a considerable number of people doing their national service, and with it being a kind of demanding kind of area of expertise, as it were, the people who were doing national service found their way into it. And so I found myself surrounded by people who had either gone to university and graduated, or they were actually going to university after they'd done their national service. So it was extremely stimulating from my point of view, and I mean really kind of raised my awareness to a totally different level. I can't quite remember when I was made aware of George Orwell, but perhaps it was influenced by somebody I knew. I can't absolutely be sure. Of course, in common with people of my age and the kind of education we'd had, we really, I mean, the only word is inculcated. Everything was, the British Empire and society, and was the way it should be. I mean, one was never encouraged to question it. I mean, it was just taken as read that, in fact, this was the way the world was, and it was to the benefits of the world, the way it was, as it were. So it was really quite interesting to start reading George Orwell. I think, in fact, initially probably a couple of his novels, Keep the Aspidestra Flying, I think was probably the first one. More interesting, in fact, also Road to Wigan Pier was interesting, but that was a rather specialised book. More interesting, in fact, was actually the essays and journalism. And I began to get a completely different view of the world. He was scathing about colonialism, and I began to see the reality of it. We really had no right to be in these places in the world. None. I mean, historically we'd been there, but colonialism really is just a way of asset stripping. I mean, it's a matter of stealing the resources of the indigenous population. I know this probably particularly under elderly people who would actually regard this kind of way of looking at it with horror, but that is the reality. And of course, historically, the mess that's been left behind by the efforts to retain this control over the world in the various regions. I mean, the conflicts continue now, which had their origins in these attempts to actually retain control and continue to occupy these countries. So he was very, very influential in my life, and also allied with this, of course, I was faced probably for the first time with the realities of the English class system, and this feeling of deference to people who spoke standard English. And again, one had been inculcated to some extent that, if you spoke standard English, you were per se intelligent. Well, I very quickly realised this was not the case, and reading Orwell, in fact, kind of gave me another insight into this too. It was a very, very, it was an eye-opener, and also having these people around me who were questioning, and even within the military concept were somewhat rebellious, much to the chagrin of some of the authority figures. It's the way it was, but they were national servicemen; they had nothing to lose. Whereas I enlisted in, of course, which was rather different. Of his novels, I think probably one of my favourite ones, which again is rather polemical, but in fact I do love, is actually Coming Up for Air. Where an individual who was born in a deep rural, small, villagey, not even a town, I think his father was a seed merchant, and memories of his childhood, and then in middle age goes back there and finds that in fact it's grown into an enormous town. It's a really delightful book, actually, and the usual kind of Orwell preoccupations, as it were. He was not sort of too keen on vegetarians and good lifers, as it were. So I've continued to read Orwell, and I still, obviously now that I have the 4 volumes of the collected journalism, which goes back way before the Second World War, and some of it is dated, for sure, and issues which were controversial, long gone, as it were. But it's an incredibly valuable archive, and actually a view of the world, and there's still a great deal to be learned. I mean, he was a very, very good writer, wrote very, very clear, incisive English, and an enormous influence. And I know now, of course, he's the hero, as it were. I mean, many people have become aware of Orwell, and he has an enormous regard, as it were. But he really turned me from a kind of flag-waving individual to somebody who began to question things. I think it's a pity in some ways that probably many of my contemporaries never actually had this influence on their lives, and of course, frankly, particularly amongst older people, and I understand why, of course, and their attitudes, in fact, could have been very different if they'd have actually had Orwell as an influence, and their certainties would perhaps not have been quite so certain. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please subscribe.